Since this was my final Tarkovsky film, I thought I would review it in sepia tone. It felt it felt right. Um, so I don't even know where to begin. This is The Sacrifice. It's from 1986. It's his final film. It's a post-apocalyptic, or it's an apocalyptic film. Main character's name is Alexander. Oh, this film was made in Sweden because, again, much like the previous film that was made in Italy, Andrei Tarkovsky was sort of ousted from the Soviet Union. So this is a about a man named Alexander who is a journalist and critic who used to be an actor, but he's given that up and now he's a critic. But it's his birthday and his family's there and his son and all these people, and then suddenly the bomb drops and it's World War III. Now there are a lot of mid 80s films about the bomb dropping, including one of my favorite horror films, um, April Fool's Day. But there's a lot of pop songs also about this. And then obviously the Berlin Wall fell, and suddenly we weren't going to have nuclear war again. And then cut to 30 years later, and we're back there. So it's always great to, realize we're regressing as a society. But anyways, he has an existential crisis because he already hates technology and has moved to the seaside with his wife in order to get away from technology. But the bomb is dropped, and his wife is freaked out, and his son doesn't speak because he's just had throat surgery and like what's going to happen. And so he and his friend decide the only thing he can do is to sleep with this woman that may or may not be a witch. And of course that's what happens because, you know, magical realism. And then eventually he still decides he has to sacrifice everything in his life and everything that he loves. So he isolates or alienates his family, burns down his house, and gets chased by some people from basically an insane asylum. And then his son speaks. That's the end of the movie. It contains a lot of the things that Tarkovsky is known for, with the landscapes and the trees and the forest and the nature and shots of people sitting in wooden houses and, you know. But what I've noticed in watching all this Tarkovsky very close together, if you'll recall, it was just over a week ago that I first saw The Steamroller and the Violin. That was a movie filled with true human connection. And as his movies progress, it's more and more about how maybe he got really, I don't know, cynical as he got older, because his films end up being about how human connections don't exist. And then his characters get really, really selfish. And by the end, you have this man who has decided that in order to make a deal with God to save the world, he has to get rid of all of his possessions. And that includes burning down his house, except that he's not the only one that lives in that house. His wife and children live in that house, and there's ramifications to them no longer having a house that he does not even think about. And to him, sacrificing his family and them is between him and God. But, like, I'm sorry, there's ramifications for the women and the children involved in this story as well, and that's not really discussed. And I feel the same way about the one I watched yesterday, where it's just the women are just not really thought of, and that's frustrating. But it's beautiful, and this one in particular is gorgeous because it's shot by Sven Nykvist, and Sven Nykvist is one of the great cinematographers of all time. There's a great documentary on him that I watched a few years ago, but he shot a lot of Bergman's films and some of Woody Allen, I think, and because Woody Allen wants to be Bergman, and what else? Something great, lots of things. Autumn Sonata. Yeah. So what am I trying to say? Basically, as an overall thoughts on Tarkovsky, I'm glad that I watched these films. They are gorgeous. He is clearly one of the great technical filmmakers of all time. I can now hold a conversation with cinephiles who love Tarkovsky and tell them why I didn't. And all's well with the world, because I very rarely like things everyone else does, so that's good. I'm going to stay with my thoughts that I thought The Steamroller and the Violin was really good, and I thought Ivan's Childhood was also really, really good. So this was The Sacrifice. It's I think it's also from Kino. I'm not sure. It just had a 4K restoration a few years back. But you can watch it on Filmstruck until Thursday. I'm going to watch a documentary called The Cinema of Andrei Tarkovsky or something like that. To see if this documentary can convince me to enjoy these films more than I did actually watching them. I don't know. I'm going to say that I appreciate him as a filmmaker, even if I don't care for his films. That's that's my final word on Tarkovsky. Um, I'm going to go to bed, wake up and watch a noir because the cinema never ends, children. There's so many movies and so little time.